Hello, Morton Grove. This program is going to introduce you to our three legislators, Representative Biss, Representative Lang, and Representative D'Amico. All three of these gentlemen represent a portion of Morton Grove, and they're very vital to Morton Grove. Unfortunately, tonight, Representative Lang is detained by important business in Springfield, so he cannot be here, and he wishes to be excused. Representative D'Amico, Representative Biss will be here and explain to you what they've done for Morton Grove and what they're going to do. I would like to personally thank Representatives D'Amico and Lang, who have been long-term standing representatives in Morton Grove, for everything they've done for Morton Grove. They've secured over almost a $500,000 grant from the state for the village of Morton Grove for a railroad crossing, in addition to, in the last 12 months, of almost $300,000 of additional funding for street pavings and other projects throughout the village. They truly are public servants for the village of Morton Grove. I hope you will find this program informative. Thank you and good evening.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Must See MGTV. I know that's not really the name, but while we're searching for a new one, I guess it'll have to do. We have a special lineup on our show this time around. We're going to bring you inside the Illinois legislature, and these days that's not always a very comfortable place to be. We'll discover why and speak with state representatives, two of the ones who represent Morton Grove, on their roster of communities as well as what they do here. First up, we have State Representative John D'Amico. In addition to representing Morton Grove, he also represents the 39th, 40th, 41st, 45th, and 50th wards in Chicago, along with parts of Lincolnwood, Skokie, Niles, and Glenview. He was elected a state representative in 2004, and among the legislation that he has passed is a bill that requires the doubling of practice hours behind the wheel to receive a graduated driver's license. It restricts the use of cell phones while teens are driving and bans texting while driving. Our second guest is the newly elected Representative Dan Biss, who was sworn in just 6 days before our taping. His district includes Morton Grove, Glenview, Skokie, Wilmette, and 6 other north suburban communities. Before heading to Springfield, he was a math professor at the University of Chicago. So our first round of questions, we'll start with Representative D'Amico. You have worked as a state representative now for several years. You've had the opportunity to find out all about the legislature. How difficult is this job, and is it more difficult than you thought it would be?
You know what, the job is very difficult, but it's very rewarding too, because when you're able to go down there and actually accomplish something, whether you're bringing something back to the community, or in my case, the legislation that I have worked on has been trying to make the roads here in Illinois as safe as possible, you're actually saving lives. So that is rewarding when you sit back and you see, for me, when I see the numbers of fatalities that have gone down on the Illinois roads, that makes us all the hard work worthwhile.
So you would say that probably is your biggest accomplishment in all the years?
Absolutely, and I'm going to continue to work on that. Our graduated driver's license that we passed here in Illinois is one of the strictest in the nation, and that started a whole chain of other laws that we started to work on and wound up getting national attention as well. They, Ray LaHood, the Secretary of Transportation, invited me out to D.C. to speak on a conference because they wanted to see what we're doing here in Illinois that we can do in other states. The fatalities in Illinois this year were the lowest since 1921. When we passed the graduated driver's license, the teen fatalities the first year went down 47%. You know, I had no idea that it would have that kind of impact on our teen drivers, and I'm very, very happy that that worked out in that way.
What got you started in going after that as an issue?
You know what? It's just actually what wound up happening. Unfortunately, there was a tragedy just outside my district, but I knew the 2 young men, and I knew their families, and some people in the community wound up asking me to try and raise the driving age to 18. So I introduced a bill to try and raise that age to 18, and here's a perfect example how a bill that never made it even to committee, never got voted on, but had such great impact on this entire state because it wound up raising the awareness. When I introduced that bill, there was not a news station around that did not contact me and want to talk about why do we need to raise the driving age to 18. And that started the ball rolling because Jesse White wound up putting together a task force on teen driving and later on distracted driving, and that wound up coming up with our graduated driver's license that we wound up putting in place, which we didn't raise the age, but we wound up giving the kids so much restrictions that they wind up becoming a better driver in the meantime. And when you really think about it, our kids, and I know my kids as well, you know, we spend so much time with them trying to teach them how to catch a baseball or shoot a basketball, play football, whatever it is. But yet when it came time for them to drive a car, we practically just handed the keys over to them, and that could possibly kill them and somebody else. And this legislation addressed that, and I'm proud to say Lou Lang helped me with that, get that through the House, and we're looking to do a lot more of that in the future. I mean, I can go on about some of the other bills that we've done that have helped reduce these fatalities here in Illinois.
Something else you were involved in too is bringing in money to the village of Morton Grove to do this road paving project, which,
yes,
while anytime there's a road paving project, drivers are upset with it until it's done, and this is going to be something that really makes traffic move much smoother in the village.
Well, and not only make the traffic move much smoother, but it's going to help, you know, all our storefronts along Dempster Avenue, along Waukegan. You know, infrastructure is not like, it's something that we have to get done. It's not, you know, like you said, while we're living through it, people are upset, but in the end, everybody's happy that we were able to get it.
Working in Springfield is a different kind of animal. How has the atmosphere changed over the years that you've been there?
Well, I'll tell you, the atmosphere has changed, and you know, Dan's going to quickly find out how it's changed. And I think right now that it's for the positive. You know, we have Governor Quinn is doing a great job trying to lead our state. In the past, we had some difficulties down there dealing with our governor, and that was some very contentious times, especially when you would wind up having a meeting, coming out saying one thing, and then they would change the story on you. That was very hard to deal with, and we have not had that problem now. Now dealing with Governor Quinn is a nice guy to work with.
It makes the cooperative nature of the legislature and the governorship that much better, I would assume.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, the bottom line is, you know, we all need to be working together, whether you're Democrat or Republican, because we want to represent our districts to the best of our ability. And, you know, when you have this infighting, it's very hard to get that done. And right now, we're working well together.
I'd like to move to Representative Biss. You've only been there, as we mentioned, a very short time.
That's right.
So some questions may just not be right. But what are the challenges that you see facing in your time in Springfield?
Well, thanks for that question. I was concerned you were going to ask me about how Springfield has changed since I first arrived, and I don't have much of an answer for that question. Right, exactly. You know, anybody who walks into the situation now that I've walked into has to be consumed at least partially by the budget. Right, the budget struggle has been tremendous. There's been a tremendous amount of back and forth and negotiation about what can one do. Should there be cuts? Should there be more revenue? Should there be some of each? Well, the situation as it now stands is that the legislature last week took action to increase the income tax, the corporate tax, increasing how much money is coming into the system. We know for sure, whether we like that or not, that's the end of any new revenue into the system. And guess what? The budget still isn't balanced. So now we know that from here on out, our mission is to cut what we can out of the budget to bring ourselves into balance by exercising the type of fiscal restraint that's really difficult for people who are constantly approached by constituents with worthy projects that we may just not be able to afford. So I think the first challenge that I'm walking into is one of notwithstanding the fact that it's not always fun, learning how to make difficult choices between unattractive options and learning how to say no to things that one might, in a better economy, prefer to say yes to. So I think that's the first thing. I also think, you know, as you were asking John about his experience of the change in the culture in Springfield and the challenge of accomplishing something. Look, I was just elected after what felt to me personally like a monumental amount of work and a big project and a big production to be a part of the legislature, and on election day that felt kind of like the culmination of something. Well, of course, that's a crazy way to look at it. This is the beginning. Now I'm joining an elected body of 118 people. Let's see. I was just saying to John in the hallway, I just got my license plate. It says 104 on it. So I rank 104th in seniority. So there's 103 people who have greater level of influence than me. My first challenge is to understand the different constituencies inside the legislature, understand the different constituencies across this extremely diverse state that those people are representing, and try to figure out what the best way that someone from this district can really make an impact on our system. And that's not going to be easy, because it's a very, very complex set of things to come to understand, and I'm obviously just beginning that project.
Well, when you have more than 100 people that are representing different portions of the state, getting them together in any one particular place is somewhat like herding cats, isn't it?
Probably. You know, I think there's probably a variety of different important components to the answer. One component, and again, I don't mean to go back to all the comments that you made, but John talked in really great length, and frankly, I think very inspiringly, about the work that he's done on road safety. Teenagers dying in car accidents is not a partisan question. The question of the data of what do we know about the impact of texting on road safety, what do we know about the impact of a certain number of courses on road safety, these are not partisan questions. They're questions that are empirical, and questions that when one person really delves into them and gains a lot of expertise, it's possible to bring a lot of people together. And I think that there are a great number of issues that have a very meaningful impact on people's lives, where it's possible to build extremely broad and diverse coalitions to, again, in this case, literally save the lives of teenagers in our state. Now, not everything is in that category, obviously, and particularly on the budgetary questions, which are really about, at the end of the day, who gets what and when and how, it can be hard to build that kind of broad-based unanimity. But I think the lesson that it is possible, at least, to remove some of the more acidic political discussions from these questions when you bring A, a lot of homework, and B, a sense of doing what you can for the community, is an important lesson that probably has some value even in the more partisan or more confrontational aspects of the debate.
As we mentioned in the introduction of you to the folks in Morton Grove, a lot of people don't realize that you're representing all of these different towns, and so all of these different communities have varying requests. How do you sort of balance that out so that you make them all, make everybody as happy as you can? And maybe it's too early to ask you that.
Well, it's not too early for me to say that I intend to do it by just trying, by being as accessible as possible, so as to have as strong relationships as possible with all 10 of those municipalities, because I do represent portions of 10 different municipalities. And I think one thing that's really important, and an important lesson, particularly in a system like Illinois where we have so many different layers of government, is to make sure that we don't silo every discussion apart from every other discussion. And so to not only have a relationship with the municipal government of Morton Grove and the municipal government of Skokie, but to have a discussion together with those two governments and the other municipal governments, so that on the many areas that aren't just about, hey, we have a project in our town that we want your help with, but rather about, here's an area of public policy where a certain change might be beneficial for municipalities across the north suburbs, we can all be on the same page and not turn the discussion into one of these, wait, if I help this side, then I don't have as much time to help that side, and someone else is going to be upset. I think if we can try to turn these interactions into everybody benefits more by collaboration, rather than how carefully can we divide up the pie, we all wind up better for it.
And getting anything done requires you to hear from people in the public in the different towns, as well as the city leaders.
Of course.
What kind of input do you look for from them, and I guess what kind of input do you expect?
Well, again, my expectations are probably irrelevant, because reality will come crashing down on me soon enough. In fact, it's already beginning to. In terms of what I would like, I think of this in two categories. The first basic responsibility of any elected representative in any form of government is to be accessible, to be responsive. If you come to me I want to hear what you have to say, and I want to respond as carefully and thoughtfully, and then maybe get back to you again a second time a few months later when I learn more about the issue. And so whether that's you walking into the door of my office, you calling me, you emailing me, you writing me a letter, you should get an immediate response, and not just a response, but I need to have internalized and understood what you've said. But the other part of it, which I think is also extremely important, is to recognize that as valuable as input that people choose of their own volition to give can be, that doesn't represent everybody, because most people just don't think to write to their elected representative. And so the other part of my job that I think is really important is to reach out to people directly and as proactively as possible solicit their input. So when I was running for office, I knocked on 20,000 doors. That was a great tactic to get elected, but it was also a very, very valuable tool to understand the wishes of the community. And I don't not plan to say, okay, now I'm in, I don't have to do that anymore. On the contrary, now that I have the privilege of representing that district, it's even more important that I aggressively reach out to people at their door by holding events across the district and by calling people to understand what's important to them.
Well, we are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll discuss some of the more weighty issues that are facing us all. Representative Biss already started us off with talking about the budget, and that's going to take center stage when we come back. Welcome back to Must See MGTV as we continue our discussion with two of our state representatives from Morton Grove. One of them, Representative John D'Amico, and the other, Daniel Biss. Both of them are representing portions of Morton Grove. Representative Lou Lang could not be here tonight because of prior legislative commitments. Representative D'Amico, we have heard about the tax increase. Everyone's talked about it. It probably feels like everyone in the district has called you about it. The money from this income tax hike, which is huge by most local people's pockets, really looks to be just enough to fund the state workers' pension fund, and really not a whole lot more than that. Obviously, we have a lot more spending that's going on, so if that is the case, how can this increase be enough?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I did not vote for the tax increase. And one of the things that I kept, when I was meeting with constituents throughout my district talking about the tax increase, people that came in favor of it, I said, look, if we vote for this tax increase today, first of all, I did not see a bill at that time. We don't know where the cuts are going to be. If a tax increase passes, there's still going to be cuts. So you're coming in here to advocate for a tax increase. What happens if we raise the taxes and you still get cut? Then what are you going to do? You're going to be back in my office saying, if you raise the taxes, how come I got cut? And I, in good conscience, just did not vote for it because I heard from a lot of constituents. For one, I didn't see the bill yet. And two, an awful lot of my constituents contacted me urging me to vote no.
There was a lot of urging by the governor originally, going back to last year in the last session of the legislature, for an increase by 1% or 1.5%. That didn't happen.
No, the final bill wound up raising the taxes by 2%, which some of it's going to be phased out over the years. Like Dan was saying, there's a lot of great causes out there that we, in good times, we probably will fund. But right now, now that this bill has passed, we got to exercise fiscal restraint and make sure that we get it right, because there is no more money available.
And of course, in the bill, there was a provision to cap spending increases,
yes.
But that starts next year.
Right, and if we exceed that cap, the tax goes away.
But what do we do to stop this year, and I'll be colloquial here, from allowing the legislature to spend like drunken sailors if they know, well, next year and the year after we have to keep it at 2%?
I don't think that's going to happen. We currently right now have a lot of bills that we have to catch up on. I don't think they're going to be able to run wild with it, and I'm try to fight to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Well, one of the things that I know you've done over your career is take a look at where all the money is going. There are so many places where the state is obligated to spend money, but yet we don't have the money they're obligated to spend. So as you know, we have pharmacies and hospitals and other places that haven't been paid for 6, 8, 10 months. How do we fix that? Because there have to be cuts somewhere.
Well, some of the stuff that we're obligated to pay, we're going to have to pay. Right now, I mean, same thing with some of our municipalities. They're hurting because they haven't received their money, and this is going to get them their money right now. The stuff that we have to pay, I mean, there's no way around it. We have to do that, and what we have to make sure is, what I don't want to see happen is I don't want to wind up seeing money just thrown out the window and wasted. I mean, if it's a cause that we have to fund, by golly, let's do it. But if it's not right, I don't want no part of it.
Everyone talks about the pension plans and how they are really taking an awful lot of money out of the budget. Is there anything that, for the people who currently are getting their pensions, obviously there isn't anything you can do to change the way state pensions are structured. Is there any way to make changes in that system 4 years coming up?
Well, we did major pension reform this last session, which we were one of only 14 states throughout the country that did it, which is going to save the state an awful lot of money over time. It's not now, the savings aren't going to be realized immediately, but over time. And we lengthen the amount of time that the people have to work. We changed the amount that they're going to be getting, the percentage on their retirement. So we took steps in that direction to address it. But as far as, the pension hole, like in some of our municipalities, didn't meet up with their obligations as well. And that's why part of the problem we're in today.
Representative Biss, this is, of course, brand new to you, so it's like walking into the lion's den. How do you avoid the chomp?
By following John's lead at every turn. I think that every decision has to be based upon a two-part bedrock. One is a absolutely solid and methodical understanding of the numerical underpinnings of the situation. Done a lot of homework in my life, and I plan to do a lot of homework in the General Assembly as well, just to make sure that I don't rely on information which maybe comes down from on high very, very quickly and is perhaps not digestible or perhaps hard to independently verify. So the one part is making sure that I have my homework done very solidly, and I'm already trying to read everything I can to make sure I'm prepared. And the other is, as I said before, to make sure that I'm in constant touch with the people across the district. I don't mean to be pedantic here, but the title of my job, after all, is representative. And if I'm not being extremely proactive about trying to understand what the people who I'm called to represent want, then I can't really make a very sensible decision on their behalf.
How has the state's financial condition affected the way you think about your job?
Well, the state's financial condition has made it the case that there just isn't. One can't think about the job from the point of view of, hey, which worthy program shall we start now? I think there were times when that's what a new legislator would be thinking about. Here's a new program I could do. Here's a new worthy enterprise in my district I could help. That's a standard way that a lot of legislators throughout time have thought about what their job is. Perhaps that's why we've come to this situation, because the system basically encouraged each legislator to, for very good reason and in response to very reasonable requests, bring as much home as possible. And when 118 people in the House and 59 people in the Senate are each doing that independently, the cumulative effect is simply unaffordable. Instead of that being the model, my model now is, what can we possibly do to increase in efficiency? What can we cut? Of the following 5 things we want, which 3 are we going to just not be able to afford? Here are the biggest areas of the budget. What could we do to make those services delivered in a more efficient way? Or if we can't do it more efficiently, we'll have to do a little bit less of it. So what's the most important aspect of that service we can deliver? That's it sounds negative, frankly, because it's all about how can we pare back. But when we're making those difficult decisions about where you pare back, it's really important they be done carefully and thoughtfully, because the last thing you want to do is to make cuts that are more painful than necessary, and to leave in place one program which is maybe less valuable and less beneficial to the community simply because you didn't think carefully enough about where the cuts should begin.
Of course, all cuts are going to be painful, and that means you're going to hear from those who are feeling the pain.
Mm-hmm.
How do you address those who are out there right now who will be feeling that pain?
There's simply nothing you can say except for the fact. Well, let me back up a little bit. There's been a lot of talk about the tax increase, and my position, for what it's worth, was that where it's probably the case that new revenue is necessary, it shouldn't have come before all the rest of the cuts. It should have been paired with the other cuts. But that hasn't entirely happened, and so we're in a different situation than a lot of us anticipated. But that provides us with a rhetorical opportunity in response to your question, which is that if someone comes to me and says, gosh, this is a cut that is more than I can bear, how could you? The response is, everyone in the whole state has already been asked to sacrifice. Everybody in the state has had their income taxes increased. Every business in the state has had its corporate income tax increased. Everyone has been called upon to sacrifice. And so, whereas the cuts will be painful, and they may feel unfair, it's not the case that the people who are being cut are being singled out and they're the only ones. Actually, every single one of their neighbors has also sacrificed, and I think that might make the pill a little bit easier to swallow.
Representative D'Amico, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but you got your finger on the pulse of what's happening around not only the state, but especially in your district. What do you foresee as being the biggest hurdle to overcome with this budget crisis?
Just to make to make sure that we exercise fiscal restraint. I mean, the taxes were raised, and like Dan says, you know what, the cuts are we need to have the cuts are gonna be in place. Everybody's gonna feel the pain, and we cannot let, like you mentioned earlier, we can't let them run wild with this money, because there is no more revenue after this. This is done.
There's always the pull between entitlement programs and infrastructure, and those seem to be the two big places where money is spent. How can you pare back either one and still have public safety?
It's going to be very hard. And you know, the infrastructure is paramount, because you have to maintain public safety, whether you're maintaining our water mains or you're keeping the streets plowed in the wintertime. That is something that we have to do. And some of these entitlement programs are great causes. Some of them have to get cut. Doesn't mean they're going to get put out of existence, but some of them are going to have to get cut. I do not think we can cut back on our infrastructure program throughout the state. That's my opinion.
Well, thousands of bridges and roads that absolutely must be repaired or they become unsafe.
Well, and here's the thing. Look, in Minnesota, what was it, last year, when they had a bridge collapse over, I think it was over the Mississippi. You cannot let these things go unmaintained. You have to maintain that, because we have to maintain safety.
And what's cut down in Springfield, of course, rolls downhill, which means it also gets cut at the various cities and towns around the state.
Right.
The word for everyone, I guess, is belt tightening.
That's right.
But unfortunately, we have run out of time, and I'd love to speak with you all more. Perhaps we can have you back in the future. We have been speaking with State Representatives John D'Amico from not only Chicago, but several other suburbs and part of Morton Grove, and Dan Biss, who represents Morton Grove and several other communities in the North Shore. Certainly we'd like to have you back so we can find out how well things have gone and where we go from there. We hope you'll join us again for our next program of Must See TV, or at least Must See MG TV. I'm Christopher Michael.